The day was calm, painted with the kind of silence that makes people trust the world for a moment. The sun hung gently above the road, the air was dry, and the highway stretched endlessly like a promise that nothing could go wrong. A passenger bus rolled down that road, full of people heading home, heading somewhere, maybe toward love, maybe toward work, but mostly toward the ordinary rhythm of life. Laughter whispered among the seats. A baby slept in a mother's arms. The driver hummed softly, and for a while, everything felt safe, predictable, peaceful. But peace never asks before it leaves. It began with a sound. A sudden, deafening pop tore through the air. A tire bursting with a violent snap. The steering wheel jerked from the driver's hands as the bus swerved uncontrollably. Metal screamed against asphalt, the heavy body of the vehicle dragging sparks across the road. Inside, confusion turned to fear. The passengers gripped seats, some shouted prayers, others froze. Within seconds, the smell of burning rubber invaded every breath. Panic spread like a second fire, invisible but hotter than any flame. Then came the real terror. The leaking fuel caught fire beneath the bus, a small flicker at first, orange and weak, then hungry, powerful, roaring its way up through the side panels. Flames climbed like living creatures, swallowing paint, glass, and sound. Windows cracked from the heat, smoke poured in, and the quiet road became a stage for chaos. The once ordinary bus was now a cage, a furnace trapping lives within it. Screams mixed with the sound of shattering glass. Someone pounded on the doors. Someone else cried for help that didn't come soon enough. The smell of fear became stronger than the smoke. People on the roadside saw it happen, but shock is its own kind of prison. They stood still, unable to move, unable to believe what they were seeing. The fire danced brighter, the sound grew sharper, the heat pushed them back. The bus was burning faster than time itself. The driver tried to force open the emergency exit, but the handle melted under his hand. He fell back, coughing, choking on the black cloud that filled the narrow aisle. Inside, children cried for their mothers. Mothers shouted their children's names. Old men tried to shield strangers with trembling arms. Every second stretched into eternity. The fire had no mercy. It crawled forward, devouring the seats row by row. The windows glowed red. The air inside grew heavy, unbreathable. Some prayed louder now. Some just closed their eyes, waiting for an end that was coming too soon. From a distance, the sound of engines echoed. A military convoy passing along the same road. In one of those vehicles sat a soldier, watching the horizon like any other day, when suddenly he saw the smoke, thick, black, rising like a warning from the earth. The closer they got, the clearer it became it wasn't just smoke. It was a burning bus, a moving tomb if no one acted fast. Without a word, the soldier's instincts awakened. Before the driver could stop completely, he had already jumped out, boots hitting the asphalt hard, eyes locked on the flames. The civilians standing by tried to stop him, shouting that it was too dangerous, that the bus could explode any second. But danger was not new to him. What was new was the sight of so many helpless faces behind that fire. He could see the reflection of the flames in their terrified eyes. He could hear the trapped voices inside, weak, muffled, desperate. That sound alone could rip through any man's heart. And for him, that was enough. His body moved before his mind could reason. Each step closer to the bus felt heavier. The heat bit into his skin, the smoke clawed at his throat, but he didn't stop. He could feel the ground tremble beneath the fire's fury, but that too didn't stop him. The soldier had seen fear before, in war zones, in battlefields, but this was different. These were civilians, ordinary souls who had no defense, no armor, no escape, and that made the fire feel like an enemy far worse than any human one. The flames grew wilder, stretching outward as if warning him to stay away. But courage doesn't ask for comfort. It doesn't calculate chances. It only moves forward when others can't. The soldier knew the next few minutes would decide everything. whether those people lived or died. So he ran toward the bus, the sound of the fire filling his ears, the heat wrapping around him like a storm. The explosion hadn't come yet, but everyone could feel it waiting, breathing, counting down. Smoke rose into the bright sky like a dark flag. The soldier reached the side of the bus and saw faces pressed against the windows, hands banging, eyes begging. He shouted for them to move back, his voice cutting through the chaos. Inside, some understood, some didn't, but the spark of hope flickered for the first time. That moment, that single instant before action, was the birth of something extraordinary. The calm of the morning was gone. The peace of the world had been burned away. But standing there, facing a burning beast of fire and steel, one man decided that fear would not win. The world might have stopped for everyone else, but not for him. Because sometimes, a soldier's battle begins where the war ends. Not with bullets, but with courage, not with orders, but with heart. And as the fire roared louder, that soldier took his first step into the flames. He didn't think. There wasn't time for that. When the soldier saw the burning bus, everything inside him shifted from stillness to motion, from silence to purpose. It was as if his body already knew what to do before his mind could catch up. 1 second, he was just another traveler on that endless stretch of road. The next, he was running toward the flames, his boots hitting the ground like thunder. The smoke rose higher, thick and cruel, wrapping the air with the stench of burning fuel. It was the kind of sight that makes most people turn away. But for him, it was a call. People were screaming, waving their hands, begging him not to go closer. "It's going to explode!" someone shouted. But their words faded under the sound of crackling fire. His eyes stayed locked on the bus. Through the window, he could see shadows moving, hands slamming against glass, faces twisted in panic, small silhouettes pressed against the seats. The soldier's breath grew heavy. He could feel his pulse racing, not from fear, but from urgency. Every second was a life slipping away. He had been trained for battlefields, for bullets, for chaos that had names and uniforms. But this was different. There were no enemies here, only innocent people swallowed by a merciless fire. And yet, somewhere deep inside, he felt that same instinct rise, the same one that drives a soldier to protect, no matter the cost. His training wasn't commanding him now. His heart was. The heat hit him first. It rolled out like a wall, pushing him back as he got closer. His skin stung, his eyes watered, and the smoke burned his throat. But he didn't slow down. He took off his jacket and covered his mouth, lowering his head as he ran. The air was so thick it felt alive, clawing at his lungs, trying to keep him away. But he pushed through. Every step was a fight. Every breath felt borrowed. Yet there was no hesitation. There couldn't be. He reached the bus and slammed his fists against the side, shouting for anyone who could hear him. From inside, he heard faint cries. "Help us! Please!" That sound shattered whatever fear he might have had left. He circled the vehicle, searching for a way in. The front door was jammed, melted shut by the heat. He kicked it hard again and again until his boot tore the glass away, sending shards flying. The flames roared back in answer, but he didn't stop. Climbing inside felt like stepping into another world. One painted in smoke and fire. The seats were already burning, the windows glowing red from the heat. The air was thick, every breath a punishment. He crouched low, crawling toward the voices. He could barely see, only the outlines of desperate faces and trembling hands reaching toward him. He grabbed one, then another, pulling them out through the broken door, shouting for the others to move, to crawl, to fight. His uniform caught fire on the sleeve, but he slapped it out with his bare hand, ignoring the pain. There was no time for it. Pain could wait. Lives couldn't. Outside, people began to move, emboldened by what they saw. Some started helping, grabbing those he pulled out, carrying them away from the burning wreck. But the soldier didn't stop to look. He kept going back in, deeper each time, through the heat and smoke that grew heavier, meaner. Every second felt like hours. Every scream burned into his mind. Inside, a child was crying, his voice fading in the chaos. The soldier followed it, crawling over twisted metal through the haze. He found the boy wedged between two seats, too weak to move. He lifted him in his arms, covering the child's face with his jacket. The flames licked at his boots, his hands trembled, but he turned and carried him out. When he stepped outside again, his face was blackened with soot, his eyes red and watery. The crowd stared, some in awe, some in tears, but he didn't notice. He laid the boy on the ground, caught his breath once, and went back in. Because somewhere in there, more voices still called for help. That was all he could hear. Not the roar of the fire, not the warnings from the crowd, not even the pounding of his own heart. Just those voices. And each one mattered. Each one was worth another step, another burn, another breath. The soldier's hands were bleeding now. His arms trembled from exhaustion, but the fire inside him burned hotter than the one before him. He wasn't just rescuing strangers. He was saving pieces of humanity, reminding the world what it means to care beyond fear. That's what separated him from the rest. Not his rank, not his uniform, but his refusal to let anyone die when he could still stand. When he finally stumbled back, the world around him blurred. He could barely see the sky through the rising smoke. His lungs screamed for air. But he looked at the faces around him. The people who were alive, breathing, crying, holding on to each other. And something in him softened. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The moment spoke louder than any words could. He had gone into that fire without orders, without thinking of medals or glory. He went because that's what a soldier's heart does. It moves before the mind can argue. It hears pain and answers it. It runs toward the danger everyone else runs from. That's not just courage. That's instinct born from kindness, from the belief that life, every life, is worth the risk. And as the soldier stood there, smoke curling behind him, the world seemed to pause for a breath. The bus still burned, but the sound of crying had faded, replaced by the trembling silence of survival. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't heroism. It was something quieter, deeper. The simple truth that sometimes duty doesn't end at the battlefield. It begins in moments like this, when one man chooses to save instead of stand and watch. The flames were no longer just fire. They had become living beasts, roaring and clawing at the sky. The air around the bus shimmered from the heat, the smoke thick enough to blur the world into shades of black and orange. People stood frozen at a distance, helpless, watching the soldier disappear into that wall of chaos. His silhouette flickered in the light of the fire, a single figure against a storm of destruction. Every instinct in a normal man would have screamed to turn back, to run. But he wasn't built that way. His body moved like it had made a pact with courage itself. He reached the side of the burning bus again, his face streaked with sweat and ash. Through the cracked windows, he could see shapes. People still inside, trapped, coughing, pressing their faces against the glass. The sound of fists hitting windows echoed through the roar of the flames. Each cry stabbed deeper than the heat ever could. He clenched his jaw and raised his rifle, not as a weapon this time, but as a tool of life. The butt of the gun struck the first window hard. Glass shattered into pieces, scattering into the air like a burst of stars. Smoke poured out in violent clouds, wrapping around him, but he didn't step back. He hit again and again, breaking through the barrier between death and a chance to live. Inside, the world was burning from every direction. Seats melted. The roof sagged. The metal hissed under the pressure of fire. The soldier covered his face with his sleeve and climbed in through the broken frame, his boots sinking into the charred floor. The heat clawed at his body instantly, searing his arms, his back, but he pushed forward. The screams grew louder, mixed with coughs, gasps, and the terrifying crackle of collapsing metal. He could barely see. The smoke made everything a blur. But through it, he saw a woman reaching out, her face streaked with soot, her eyes wide with terror. He moved toward her, grabbed her arm, and pulled her out, half dragging, half carrying. She stumbled toward the door, choking, her cries fading into the sound of fire. The soldier turned back without a second thought. There were more inside. Always more. The next time he entered, the flames were stronger. They licked at his uniform, burning holes into the fabric, kissing his skin with pain that felt alive. The rifle, now just a tool of survival, swung in his grip as he smashed another window open. Glass cut across his knuckles, drawing blood, but pain was a language he had long stopped listening to. One by one, he reached for those still inside. An old man clutching his chest, a boy trembling under a seat, a woman trying to shield her child. Each one pulled out of the inferno felt like a victory against death itself. At one point, he slipped. His knee hit the burning metal, the pain shooting through him like lightning. The smoke was thick, the oxygen thin. His vision swayed, but somewhere beyond the ringing in his ears, he heard it, a faint cry, small, distant. It wasn't over. Someone was still inside. He forced himself up, staggered toward the sound, and found a young girl. Curled up near the aisle, her clothes sinned, her small body trembling. He lifted her in his arms, wrapping her in his jacket, shielding her face from the flames. As he turned, a burst of fire erupted from the floor, lighting up everything around him. For a second, the whole bus glowed like a furnace, and his silhouette stood against it, a soldier carrying innocence through hell. When he stumbled out again, the crowd gasped. His hair was singed, his uniform scorched, his arms covered in soot and blisters. The girl clung to him, her face buried against his chest. He lowered her gently to the ground, where another woman, maybe her mother, screamed her name and ran to her. The soldier didn't speak. He just nodded once and turned back to the bus. It wasn't done yet. He went in again, because leaving anyone behind felt heavier than fire itself. He found another man trapped near the back, his leg pinned under a collapsed seat. The soldier braced himself, gritted his teeth, and pulled hard. The metal tore at his hands, his muscles screamed, but he didn't stop until the man was free. Together, they crawled out, barely escaping as a section of the roof gave way behind them. When they finally reached the outside, the fire exploded upward in a violent burst. The sound was deafening, the shockwave knocking dust and debris across the road. The soldier fell to one knee, his chest heaving, his breath ragged. The fire raged behind him, devouring what was left of the bus. He looked over his shoulder, and for a moment, he saw the reflection of the flames dancing in his eyes, the kind of look that holds both horror and pride, both exhaustion and peace. The people he had saved gathered nearby, crying, shaking, holding on to one another as if to prove they were still alive. Some tried to reach him, to thank him, but he waved them off, barely able to stand. He wasn't doing it for gratitude. He wasn't even thinking about himself. All that mattered was that they were out, that the screams had stopped. The soldier looked down at his hands, burnt, bleeding, trembling, and then back at the crowd. In that moment, there was no applause, no noise, only the sound of the fire slowly dying. The soldier took a deep breath, steadying himself. What he had done was not a story of bravery for others to tell. It was something raw, something sacred, the instinct of a man who refused to watch others die when he still had strength to move. Behind him, the bus finally collapsed, a heap of twisted metal glowing red. The fire hissed its last breath. The road was quiet again. The soldier stood there for a while, staring at the wreck, his heart still beating in the rhythm of chaos. And though he didn't know it yet, that single act, breaking through those flames, risking everything for strangers, had already written a story that would outlive the smoke, the fire, even him. It was not the kind of courage born in war. It was the courage born in kindness, the kind that shines brightest in the darkest moments of all. The fire had grown wild, spreading across the bus like an angry storm that refused to stop. The metal groaned, twisting under the heat. Flames hissed through the windows, curling upward, eating everything in their path. The soldier stood outside for a breath, his chest heaving, the smoke cutting into his lungs. His arms burned, his uniform blackened and torn, but there was no space in his mind for pain. Inside that bus, there were still voices. He could hear them, faint, broken, calling out through the roar. That sound was enough. He went back in. The air inside was a furnace. It felt alive, roaring with the hunger of something that wanted to consume everything. The soldier ducked low, his hand over his mouth, his eyes searching through the thick black smoke. The world around him was nothing but heat and noise. But through the haze, he saw them. Two small figures huddled near the back seat, a child clutching an elderly woman, both shaking, both trapped by fallen debris. The sight froze his breath for a second. They weren't running. They weren't even moving. They had surrendered to the fire. He forced himself forward, his boots slipping on melted plastic, his hands burning as he gripped the seats for balance. The flames licked at his arms, leaving marks that would never fully fade. The child saw him and began to cry, a weak, broken sound that pierced straight through his chest. "Don't move!" he shouted, his voice hoarse, almost lost in the noise. He grabbed the metal bar above the seats, yanking it away, his muscles trembling under the strain. The heat was unbearable, the smoke so thick he could barely see his own hands. But his focus was fixed on them. The bar came loose with a metallic scream. He lifted it aside, grabbed the child first, cradling him against his chest. The boy's skin was covered in soot, his breathing shallow. The soldier wrapped him in his jacket, shielding his face, then turned back for the elderly woman. She was trying to speak, her voice barely a whisper. He crouched down, hooked his arms under her shoulders, and lifted her with a strength he didn't know he had left. She was light, fragile, but every step toward the exit felt like carrying the weight of the world. Halfway through the aisle, part of the ceiling collapsed behind them, sending sparks and flames bursting through the air. The soldier's body moved faster than thought. He twisted, using his back to shield them both from the falling debris. The pain tore through him, sharp and deep, but he didn't stop. He stumbled forward, the sound of his own heartbeat louder than the fire. Each breath was agony, but he kept going. The door was only a few feet away. A few steps that felt like miles. Outside, the crowd could see him now, the outline of a man carrying two lives through the fire. Shouts rose, desperate, pleading for him to hurry. He reached the door half, falling through it, landing hard on the ground with the child in one arm and the woman in the other. The world spun, the smoke swallowing everything, but he didn't let go. He pulled them away from the bus, crawling until they were far enough to breathe clean air. The woman coughed, her voice faint but alive. The child clung to her, crying softly. The soldier looked at them, just for a second, then turned back toward the bus. He could still hear voices. More people were inside. He wiped the sweat from his eyes with a trembling hand, stood up, and went back in. The fire inside was even worse now. It screamed like a living thing, as if angry that he had stolen its prey. The smoke bit into his lungs. Every breath felt like swallowing knives. But through the darkness, he saw more figures. A mother trying to move her teenage daughter who was too weak to walk. The soldier rushed to them, his legs heavy, his hands shaking. He lifted the girl, slinging her over his shoulder, while grabbing the mother's arm. "Hold on to me!" he shouted. She nodded, her face streaked with tears and soot. Together they moved, step by step, through the narrow aisle of fire. The soldier's boots crunched over shattered glass and melted rubber. His vision blurred, his head pounding. The girl coughed against his shoulder, her body limp, and he tightened his grip. The mother stumbled beside him, whispering prayers between gasps. When they reached the exit, he shoved the mother forward first, then carried the girl out, collapsing to his knees as soon as they touched the ground. The people around rushed in to help, pulling the mother and daughter to safety. The soldier coughed violently, his throat raw, his hands trembling. But he wasn't finished. There was no finish until no one was left. He turned his head, looking back at the fire. The monster still roaring, still alive, and for a moment, he hesitated. His body was screaming to stop. His skin burned, his chest ached, but his heart refused. He went in one last time. Inside, near the front of the bus, he found another old man slumped over a seat. The flames were inches away, the air thick enough to choke. The soldier wrapped his arms around the man and dragged him out, step by heavy step. His legs nearly gave out when he reached the door, but hands from outside grabbed hold, pulling them both free. The soldier fell forward, the world spinning, the roar of the fire fading behind him. The ground felt cold against his face. He could barely see, barely breathe. The fire crackled in the distance, growing quieter now, smaller. Around him, people were crying, not in fear anymore, but in relief. He looked up, his vision blurred, and saw the child he'd rescued earlier holding his mother's hand. They were alive. All of them were alive. He wanted to speak, to tell them to stay safe, but the words didn't come. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment and let the silence settle in. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He wasn't looking for medals or headlines. He was just a soldier doing what his heart demanded, protecting life, not because he had to, but because he couldn't imagine doing anything else. And as the night fell over the smoldering wreck, the soldier sat quietly beside the people he had saved, his burn stinging, his heart steady. The world might forget his name, but the souls he carried out of that fire never would. The fire was no longer a flame. It was a beast, roaring with hunger, devouring everything it could touch. The bus had turned into a breathing inferno, every inch of metal glowing red, every surface pulsing with heat. The ground trembled beneath the weight of it, and yet, inside that chaos, one man still moved. The soldier's body was burned, his breath uneven, his eyes bloodshot from the smoke. But his focus hadn't broken. His mind wasn't on himself. It was on the lives still trapped inside. He had pulled out so many already, children, women, the elderly. But his ears caught something faint beneath the crackle of fire. A cough. A cry. Someone was still in there. People outside shouted his name, begged him to stop. Their voices cracked with fear. They could see the danger, the way the bus leaned slightly, the way the flames grew brighter every passing second. They knew the explosion was coming. It was written in the way the fuel hissed and the air thickened. But the soldier didn't stop. He turned to them, his face streaked with ash, his eyes burning with something stronger than fear. "Not yet," he said, his voice low, steady. "Not while someone's still inside." And then he went back in. The smoke wrapped around him like darkness itself. The moment he crossed that broken door, it was as if he stepped into another world, one where light didn't exist, where air was poison, where pain was constant. The heat stung his face, burned into his hands, but he crawled forward anyway, feeling his way through the maze of twisted seats. Every breath hurt, every movement felt like it could be his last. But his heart pounded with one truth: no one gets left behind. He reached the back of the bus, where the fire was at its worst. The ceiling was collapsing, raining sparks and burning fabric. His eyes squinted through the haze until he saw her. A woman, half conscious, pinned between two seats. Her lips moved weakly, but her voice was gone. Her body was limp, her clothes smoldering. He didn't hesitate. He threw his rifle aside and crawled to her, the metal floor searing his knees. He gripped the seat frame that trapped her leg and pulled. It didn't budge. He adjusted his stance, braced his body, and pulled again with everything he had left. His muscles screamed. The sound of tearing metal filled the air, followed by a sharp crack. The frame gave way. He lifted her in his arms, coughing hard as the smoke clawed at his throat. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breath faint, but she was alive. That was all he needed. He turned, struggling toward the door. The fire seemed angrier now, roaring louder, closing in from both sides. His vision blurred. The heat made the air ripple. He stumbled once, catching himself with one arm, then pushed forward again. Every step felt heavier than the last. His lungs begged him to stop, but he refused. Outside, the crowd watched in silence, frozen. The bus groaned again, metal bending under pressure. Flames shot out from the sides like warning signs. They shouted for him to come out, now, right now, before it was too late, but he was still inside, still moving through the fire, carrying life in his arms while death followed close behind. He reached the doorway, his legs trembling. The fire behind him let out a deep, guttural roar, as if it knew it was losing. He stepped out into the open air, staggering, his boots crunching against shards of glass. Hands rushed toward him, grabbing the woman from his arms, pulling her to safety. The soldier dropped to his knees, gasping for air, the world spinning around him. He heard someone say his name again, but the sound was distant, fading. His vision dimmed. He could smell the burning fuel and hear the hissing beneath the wreck. The final warning. Someone tried to pull him farther away, but he shook his head. His eyes were still locked on the bus. He needed to be sure. He needed to know that no one else was trapped inside. He turned, crawling back toward it, ignoring the shouts, ignoring the hands trying to hold him down. His body was giving up, but his will refused to follow. He peered through the shattered window one last time, searching through the waves of heat. Nothing, no movement, no sound. Just fire, wild and endless. He closed his eyes for a second, exhaling slowly. They were all out, every last one of them. He had done it. He had kept his word. And just as he turned away, just as he began to step back, the world erupted behind him. The explosion tore through the air with a sound that split the silence. Fire burst outward in a storm of light and ash, pushing him to the ground. The crowd screamed, shielding their faces as a wave of heat rolled over them. For a few seconds there was nothing, no sound, no motion, only the crackle of fire dying out. Then, through the smoke, they saw him. The soldier lay on the ground, his body covered in soot, his uniform charred, but his chest still rose and fell. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up, his hands trembling. The people ran toward him, lifting him up, their faces streaked with tears. Some called him a hero, others couldn't even speak. The soldier looked around at the survivors. The children holding on to their mothers, the old man wiping soot from his face, the young boy clutching a piece of his burnt jacket like it was sacred. And for the first time that day, a faint smile crossed his lips. He didn't see glory in what he had done. He saw relief, quiet, simple, human relief. He had faced death and brought life out of it. That was enough. When someone tried to thank him, he shook his head gently. No. He whispered, his voice weak but steady. I just couldn't leave them. As the fire finally began to fade, the soldier stood there, watching the smoke drift into the sky. His burns hurt, his lungs ached, but there was peace in his silence. Around him the world had changed, not because of the flames, but because of what they revealed. In that moment, he wasn't just a soldier. He was proof that kindness can be louder than fear, and that real courage is not found in surviving, but in refusing to walk away when others need you most. The bus was gone, reduced to twisted metal and ashes. But what remained was something the fire could never touch. The story of a man who stayed when everyone else told him to run. The air was heavy, thick with the bitter smell of smoke and burning metal. The bus, now nothing but a skeletal frame of what it once was, groaned under its own weight. The fire had eaten through every inch, its orange glow fading into the deep red of destruction. People stood in stunned silence, their faces streaked with ash and tears, their breaths uneven. The cries had stopped. The chaos had quieted. All that remained was the sound of flames snapping at the wind. And in the middle of that silence, the soldier stood, motionless, his body trembling from exhaustion, his lungs screaming for air. He had gone in and out of that bus more times than anyone could count. His uniform was torn, blackened by soot, his hands bloodied and burned. Every inch of him hurt. His throat was dry from the smoke, his eyes could barely stay open. But even now, when everyone around him begged him to stop, he refused to rest. He turned his head slightly, staring back at the wreck as if listening for one last cry. His mind wouldn't allow him to believe it was over. Not yet. The heat still radiated from the wreckage, pulsing through the air like a warning. A few men from the crowd tried to hold him back, telling him it was done, that he had done enough. But those words didn't exist for him. Enough didn't mean anything when even the smallest chance of life remained. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his heart pounding against his ribs, but he pushed forward again, stumbling closer to the bus. Just then, a faint sound tore through the stillness. The deep rumble of something shifting inside. The ground trembled lightly, the metal creaked, and a burst of sparks shot out from the rear of the vehicle. The crowd screamed for him to move away. "It's going to blow!" someone shouted. The soldier turned, just for a second, locking eyes with the faces of those he had saved. The children, the mothers, the old man with tears in his eyes. They were safe. That should have been enough to make him walk away. But something deeper kept him there. He took a slow step back, just a few feet, and in that instant, the bus exploded. The sound shattered the silence, ripping through the air like thunder. A wave of fire and debris shot upward, scattering ash across the road. The force knocked people to the ground. Flames erupted into the sky, lighting up the darkening evening. For a heartbeat, the soldier disappeared inside the cloud of smoke. Cries of panic rose from the crowd, people rushing forward, calling his name, searching for his figure in the haze. Then, through the dust and firelight, a shape began to move. The soldier emerged, stumbling, coughing, his hand pressed to his chest. His hair was singed, his face blackened with soot, but he was alive. Barely. The explosion had thrown him off his feet, and his uniform was torn to shreds, but his eyes were open, unfocused, distant but alive. He dropped to his knees, his body shaking, his breath ragged. The crowd surged toward him, arms reaching out to help, but he waved them off weakly. His first words were barely a whisper. "Everyone out?" he asked. They nodded, voices breaking as they tried to speak. "Yes, yes, you got them all." He exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his body like air escaping from a wound. For the first time, he allowed himself to fall back, sitting on the cold road, his arms hanging at his sides. The orange light of the dying fire flickered across his face. He didn't smile, but there was something calm in his expression, a kind of quiet acceptance. The mission was done. Paramedics rushed in, their sirens wailing in the distance. They checked the wounded, wrapped blankets around the shivering survivors. Some of them looked at the soldier, still sitting there, lost in the moment, as if he wasn't part of this world anymore. His mind was still back in that bus, hearing the echoes of screams, the crackle of flames, the weight of every soul he carried out. When the medics tried to lift him onto a stretcher, he resisted. "Help them first," he murmured, pointing toward the others. His voice was raw, broken, but his tone left no room for argument. The doctors exchanged glances, then did as he said. Even in pain, he thought of everyone else before himself. Minutes passed like hours. The fire finally began to fade, leaving only smoke and glowing embers. The crowd remained silent, watching him. This soldier who had fought not against men, but against death itself. Some began to cry quietly, overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. It wasn't just bravery. It was something beyond that, something pure. When the soldier finally allowed the paramedics to treat him, he sat still, his eyes unfocused, staring at the charred remains of the bus. His burns stung, his skin felt like fire, but his mind was far away. He remembered the faces he had seen in that inferno. The fear, the hope, the desperate grip of hands reaching for life. And he remembered the silence after, when he realized he had saved them all. The night grew darker, and the wind carried away the last of the smoke. The soldier stood again, ignoring the doctor's protests. He looked around at the survivors, some wrapped in blankets, some holding hands, some whispering prayers of gratitude. They all looked at him as if seeing something sacred. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. The bus was gone now, reduced to ashes and twisted steel, but the memory of what happened would remain. The soldier had walked through fire not once, but again and again, refusing to leave anyone behind. He had faced the kind of heat that melts metal and burns air, but what stayed unburned was his will, his refusal to give up on life. As he walked away slowly, the night wrapped around him, quiet and cold. The sound of distant sirens faded, replaced by the whispers of the people he saved, soft, grateful, reverent. The soldier didn't look back. He didn't need to see the destruction. He carried its memory inside him now, carved deep into his soul. He knew what the fire had taken, but he also knew what it had given. Proof that courage is not about surviving the flames, but about walking through them for others. That night, under the dim light of the burning sky, he didn't feel like a hero. He just felt human, a man who refused to retreat until every heart had a chance to keep beating. And in that silent, smoky air, that was enough. The flames were gone, but the smell of smoke still hung in the air like a haunting memory. Ash floated down from the sky, mixing with the dust that covered the road. The bus was no longer a bus, just a skeleton of twisted metal, melted seats, and shattered glass. Around it, the people who had survived sat wrapped in emergency blankets, their faces pale and stunned, eyes lost somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. And there, just a few feet away from the wreck, the soldier sat on the cold ground, his body slumped but his eyes wide open. He wasn't thinking about the pain searing through his arms or the burns on his skin. He was thinking about the faces he had pulled from the fire. Paramedics moved quickly around him, trying to wrap bandages, trying to lift him, but he kept shaking his head. "I'm fine," he whispered, even though he clearly wasn't. The doctor's hands hovered over him, hesitant, torn between duty and respect. There was something about the way the soldier sat, silent, steady, almost detached, that made everyone around him pause. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even shock. It was something else, something deeper. A small child, maybe 8 years old, broke free from the group of survivors and ran toward him. The soldier's eyes lifted slowly as the boy hugged him tightly, pressing his face into the soldier's burned chest. "You saved my mother," the child said softly. The soldier's lips trembled, but he didn't speak. He just placed a trembling hand on the boy's back, his eyes glistening under the flicker of the last dying flames. People began to gather around, not speaking, just watching him. They wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small, too fragile, too simple for what he had done. Some tried to take pictures, but others stopped them. It wasn't a moment to capture. It was a moment to remember. One of the officers approached him, kneeling beside him. "You need to get to the hospital. Soldier, you're badly injured." The soldier blinked slowly, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "There are others who need it more," he said. His tone was calm, almost tender, but it carried a weight that silenced everyone. The officer looked at him, unsure whether to argue. Then he saw the burns on the soldier's hands, skin peeled, blistered, and realized this man had already given everything he had. As the emergency vehicles began to pull away, the people he saved were still there, sitting quietly, some crying, some praying. The soldier stood at last, unsteady but determined. His legs trembled under him, but he forced himself to stay upright. A young woman, her hair covered in ash, walked over to him and held his hand. "You saved my family," she said through her tears. "You saved all of us." He looked at her gently, shaking his head. "No," he replied. "I just did what anyone should do." But that wasn't true, and everyone knew it. Most people had run from the fire. He had run into it. And yet, there wasn't even a flicker of arrogance in his voice. Only humility. He wasn't proud of what he had done. He didn't see himself as a hero. To him, it was simply what being human meant. When the military unit finally arrived to take him away, the soldier resisted again. "I'll walk," he said. His commanding officer tried to protest, but one look at his face stopped him. There was something in those eyes, a stillness, a quiet strength, that made everyone else lower their voices. He took slow steps toward the ambulance, the broken road crunching beneath his boots, each step heavier than the last. Before he climbed in, he turned back toward the wreckage. The sky behind him was dark now, only faintly glowing with the last light of the fire. He stared at it for a moment, his expression unreadable. Maybe he was seeing the faces again. Maybe he was hearing the cries that would echo in his mind for nights to come. Maybe he was just making sure it was really over. One of the firefighters walked up to him. "You saved 23 people today," he said quietly. The soldier looked at him, his brow furrowed slightly. "No," he murmured, "they saved me." The firefighter frowned, confused. The soldier's voice softened even more. "Every scream I heard in there kept me alive. Every hand that reached out reminded me why I was breathing." Then he stepped into the ambulance, finally allowing them to tend to his wounds. The doors closed slowly, the siren didn't blare, and the vehicle rolled away through the smoky road. The people he saved stood silently as it passed, some raising their hands in a small, unspoken salute. It wasn't the kind of salute given to rank or uniform. It was given to the heart that beats for others. Later that night, as news of the fire spread, the media called him a hero. They wrote headlines, shared videos, painted him as a symbol of bravery. But when asked for comment from the hospital, the soldier refused. "I don't want my name in lights," he said. "Kinness isn't something to be celebrated. It's something to be done." He lay there in the dim hospital room, the bandages wrapping his arms like armor. His eyes stared at the ceiling, but his mind wandered back to the moment when the first flame touched the bus. He thought of how helpless those people had looked. He thought of how fear could freeze a person in place, and how he never wanted to be frozen. He wanted to be the one who moved, even when it hurt, even when it burned. And as the night deepened, he understood something quietly profound: a soldier's duty doesn't end at the borders of war. It exists wherever a life trembles between hope and despair. His battle that day wasn't against an enemy. It was against time, fire, and fate, and he won. Not for himself, but for every breath that continued, because he didn't stop. The next morning, when the sun rose and the ashes began to settle, people returned to the site of the accident. They left flowers, notes, and flags, not just for the tragedy, but for the man who had turned horror into hope. And somewhere in a hospital bed, the soldier closed his eyes, not for rest, but for peace. Because he knew that in a world full of fear, one act of courage had made the difference. He hadn't saved lives to be remembered. He had done it because it was right. Because in his heart, kindness was not a choice, it was his duty. The night grew still after the chaos. The fire was gone, the screams had faded, and only the soft hum of rescue vehicles remained. The road that had been a scene of terror just hours ago was now covered in ash, twisted metal, and silence. Yet, within that silence, something powerful lingered, something that would outlast the flames. The soldier sat quietly on a stretcher, his uniform torn, his skin blistered, his hands wrapped in white bandages that were already stained. He didn't look like a hero. He looked human, tired, fragile, and painfully real. But in that moment he was more than a man. He was a symbol. A small crowd had gathered around him. Survivors, medics, police officers, and even strangers who had stopped their cars just to see what had happened. They all looked at him with the same expression, awe mixed with disbelief. How could someone walk through fire like that? How could he risk everything, not for his brothers in arms, but for civilians? People he didn't even know. The soldier didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said more than words ever could. The night breeze carried the scent of burnt rubber and diesel, but beneath that smell was something purer. The scent of courage, raw and undeniable. The soldier's gaze wandered toward the faces of those he had saved. He saw a mother holding her child close, her tears wetting the child's hair. He saw an old man clutching his chest, trembling not from pain but from gratitude. He saw the young boy who had hugged him earlier, now asleep on his mother's lap, safe. Each face reminded him why he had run into that fire. Each breath they took reminded him that his burns were worth it. When a reporter approached him with a microphone, asking for a statement, he looked up slowly, his voice barely audible. "There's nothing to say," he murmured. "Anyone in my place would have done the same." The reporter tried to insist, but his superior signaled her to stop. The look in the soldier's eyes was not one of pride. It was one of quiet refusal. He didn't want fame. He didn't want glory. He only wanted peace in knowing he had done what was right. Later, as he sat in the ambulance, a young medic asked softly, "Why did you keep going back in? You could have died." The soldier smiled faintly, the corners of his cracked lips trembling. "Because they were alive," he said. "And as long as they were alive, I couldn't stop." The simplicity of his answer made the medic's throat tighten. There was no speech, no hero's justification. Just truth, pure and unpolished. As dawn began to rise, soft light stretched across the road, illuminating the remains of the bus. Smoke drifted upward like a ghost disappearing into the morning sky. The soldier looked at it one last time. The fire had taken much: metal, glass, and nearly lives. But it had also revealed something unburnable, the strength of human compassion. It wasn't about medals or uniforms or borders. It was about a man's heart that refused to stand still while others suffered. When he was finally taken to the hospital, the story spread like wildfire across the country. Headlines screamed of heroism, of sacrifice, of bravery beyond measure. But the soldier didn't read them. He didn't want to. In his mind, the story wasn't about him. It was about the people who had survived, about the miracle of breath in the face of fire. Reporters came to his door, but he turned them away. "A soldier doesn't save lives for applause," he said quietly. "He does it because it's his duty, to life itself." Days passed, and as his wounds began to heal, he received letters from strangers, children, families, even other soldiers. They called him a hero, a savior, a man of steel. He smiled politely at each message, but in his heart, he didn't feel like any of those things. He had seen real heroism, in the eyes of the mother who shielded her child from flames, in the old man who helped others even when he could barely move, in the strangers who brought water and comfort after the chaos. He believed heroism didn't belong to one person. It belonged to humanity. When he was finally cleared to leave the hospital, he didn't go home immediately. Instead, he returned to the site of the accident. The road was quiet now, freshly cleaned, but he could still see it all. The fire, the smoke, the faces. He stood there for a long time, his hands tucked behind his back, eyes heavy but clear. Then, out of his pocket, he took a small, charred piece of metal, a fragment from the bus he had picked up before leaving that night. He placed it gently on the side of the road, like an offering. He whispered to the wind, "This wasn't about bravery. It was about being human." And in that simple sentence lay the truth of military kindness. The world often sees soldiers as warriors, trained to fight, to conquer, to defend. But kindness is also a weapon, sharper than any blade, stronger than any armor. The soldier's strength didn't come from command or discipline. It came from compassion. It came from a heart that refused to let fear win. The story of that night would be told for years. It would inspire others. It would be shared in schools, in speeches, in whispered conversations about courage. But the soldier himself would never tell it. He would return quietly to his duties, to his life of service, never mentioning the night he fought fire with humanity. To him, that night wasn't a legend. It was simply a moment where kindness took command. And maybe that's what made it so powerful. Because real heroes don't announce themselves. They don't seek recognition. They just do what must be done and disappear back into the crowd. The soldier walked away from the sight, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. The morning light caught the edge of his burnt uniform, making it glow faintly, like embers that refused to die out. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He carried that fire within him now. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that lights up the dark corners of the world. The kind that reminds people that kindness is courage, that compassion is strength, and that even in the heart of destruction, humanity can still burn bright. And somewhere in the distance, as the sun rose higher, his silhouette disappeared into the light, quiet, humble, eternal.